Okay, good evening and welcome to the monthly Future Freedom Foundation webinar, which I'm very happy to host. And tonight's is going to be called Don't Rock the Vote, and we're going to talk about the flaws of democracy. Now this began as a couple of columns I wrote for TGIF, my Friday column, and what inspired it was a commercial on MSNBC, which you might have seen. Now, we're all used to MSNBC acts of state adoration. Not only does their programming constantly laud government intrusion in all areas of life, but even their in-house promotions do that. It's really kind of odd. It's not so much that they advertise their programs; they advertise for big government, which is kind of bizarre. But I guess it makes sense. If you like big government, watch their network. So I guess it is good promotion. Rachel Maddow, of course, does this all the time. She did a famous one where she's standing in front of the Hoover Dam, I think, and saying, only government can produce great things. Only if we want to be great, we need big government. But there was another spot that was the voiceover was done by Chris Hayes, who does an evening program, that I will now show you, and I hope this will. I got to switch this to show my screen. So I'm hoping everybody will be able to see this. Okay, did everybody see that? Nod your head if you're able to see that video. Did you see a video? Okay, I don't know. Maybe you've seen that on TV. For those of you who are attending here without webcam or not in front of your computer, so maybe some people on the phone, I'll quickly describe what that was. You heard the audio from it, but it showed a series of colorful shower curtains, as Chris Hayes is saying, in America. There are many ways to express yourself, but then he gets to one final curtain, and as it's being pushed aside, you see that it's not a shower curtain at all, but it's someone coming out of a voting booth. He's holding a ballot, and Chris Hayes then says, but only one that counts. In other words, only one way to express yourself that counts: voting. That's the message. The message being vote or you have no voice. Now, whether they intended it or not, I don't see how a message could have more effectively instilled an abject passivity toward the ruling elite in the United States. If we get everybody to believe voting is really the only way to express yourself, the ruling elite will be quite happy with this situation, because it does instill an abject passivity in people. As I think Emma Goldman once said, if voting could change things, it would be against the law. In year 6 of Barack Obama, is it really necessary to point this out? Now, note the irony of the MSNBC message. They're saying voting is the only way to express yourself that counts. I guess they're playing a little play on words there because votes get counted, so they're equivocating over the word counts. But in truth, of all the ways to express oneself, voting is the way that it seems to me counts least of all. Candidates typically appear to hold a grab bag of vaguely stated, often contradictory positions that they may not even really believe and they may never attempt to carry out. Campaigns are merely theatrical productions designed to create a mood and make certain selected constituencies feel good. So voting for such people really doesn't convey much of a clear message at all. It's a grab bag. You have to compare candidate A, who you may like some of candidate A's positions, but there may be some positions you don't like, versus B, where you again there's a mix of likes and dislikes. Now you have to decide, well, who do I like? Which candidate has the combination I like best? And again, since we don't even know whether they actually believe any of that, whether they intend to do anything about it once they get into office, voting is not exactly a clear way to express preferences. And then there's the problem of the arithmetic of voting. In all but in the tiniest town, the chances of a tie in any election are close to zero, which means and no one vote matters very much. No one vote is decisive. If you think of all the elections in your lifetime, with like I say, the rarest exception if you happen to live in a tiny town, if you go back over all the elections you've lived through, if you had done something different that day, either voted for the other candidate that you didn't vote for, the candidate other than the one you voted for, or you just stayed home, or if you had stayed home that day, went out and voted, nothing would have changed. None of those elections would have changed. So one vote doesn't count in the literal sense, and therefore doesn't count in the other sense either. Now people will say, but that's ridiculous. Obviously the winner is the one that gets the most votes, and that's certainly true. But in any major election, no candidate's going to win by one vote, or there's not going to be a tie, which you'll end up breaking. Now, a lot of time when I make this argument to people, by the way, a lot of people get threatened by this non-libertarians find this very threatening. Like I'm saying something sacrilegious. I'm saying your one vote really doesn't count much, and a lot of people don't want to hear that. They seem to have convinced themselves that it does, but it's just simple arithmetic. This is not ideology. If 100 million votes are cast for president, or if we break it down by state and millions of votes are being cast in various states, the chances that one vote's going to make any difference at all is less than the chance that you'll get hit by lightning on the way to the polls. So keep that risk in mind the next time you're tempted to vote. Now, it's funny that people will say, but what if everybody thought like you? What if everybody thought, if I say it's not worth it, I'm staying home, what if everybody thought that way? Well, this kind of misses the point, because that question doesn't really address any real issue. No one is waiting to see what I'm going to do on election day and then follow my lead. Right? No one is even going to know whether I stay home or not, or whether I vote for someone else or not, and then take my lead. The rest of the country is going to do whatever it's going to do, no matter what I do. On the other hand, what if everybody did stay home? Think of the message that would send. So that wouldn't be so bad anyway, but that's not going to happen. You only control yourself, and we normally undertake actions only when we believe that they have a good chance of affecting consequences that matter. Otherwise, we don't act. I mean, this is basic praxeology, right? Human action is the attempt to achieve an end, and adapting means calculated or assumed to be viable in achieving the end. If we are convinced that nothing we do can achieve a certain end, we typically forget about it. I mean, I might want to go to the moon by flapping my arms or by some other form of locomotion, but I know that's not going to happen, so I'm not spending time thinking about it. I'm not trying to do it. The opportunity cost would be too high. There's many other things I could do that really would make a difference in my life, my family's life, and my community's life, things I can really carry out. Why waste time and money on something that won't have an effect? So if the motive to vote is to change the outcome, that's not a good idea. And I'm not sure people really do believe they will change the outcome. I think they have other things in mind. Now, and I'm not here criticizing any other motivations for voting. I may not share them, but my point here is not to criticize other possible motivations. People vote because they feel good about doing their civic duty. I mean, I don't share that view, but people do. Notice that's different from trying to change the outcome. They want to get their little set, their little drop of water into the ocean. If they feel good by that, then they feel good by that. I'm not going to say they shouldn't. They may feel good. They may like the idea of identifying with a particular community. A lot of people might have voted for Ron Paul for that reason. Or they might like to get that little sticker you get that you can then wear at work, proudly saying you voted. I mean, whatever floats your boat, they used to say. The point is that casting one more vote is hardly a way to express yourself. That counts. Contrary to what Chris Hayes and MSNBC might think. Now, this all has deep implications for the political system. I think individuals realize they're not going to no given individual is going to make the difference. I think people know that, and I think they're voting for other reasons. And so I think these reasons then get all folded together. But since voting, the individual's voting has no practical consequences, even if one's preferred candidate wins, most of the cost of the winner will not be on the individual voter. It'll be on the rest of society, right? You'll only pay. Let's say somebody's voting for someone who wants to raise taxes or create some big spending programs. Let's say, Chris Hayes likes that idea and therefore wants to do that. Let me see. I'm getting a message here about my slow connection. Okay, we'll see what happens here. All right, sorry about that interruption. I was getting a slow connection message. Even if a big government voter's preferred candidate wins, that voter is only going to pay a really tiny percentage of whatever additional costs that candidate is going to be responsible for, because there are externalities, right? Everyone else is going to pay their, quote, their share, even people that voted against the candidate or who didn't vote at all. So, it's not like when you go into a store, if you buy something, you pay the full cost, you also get the product, but you pay the price. Here, you don't pay you pay a tiny sliver of the price. So, since voting doesn't have practical consequences for the individual, the system encourages irresponsibility. The individual voter is like kind of like a toddler in a car seat with a pretend steering wheel. He thinks he's controlling something, but it's an illusion. Under these circumstances, then most people have zero incentive to undertake the considerable effort and expense that it would take to become a seriously informed voter. This would require not only learning about the candidates, which would take some time in itself. You're not just going to go to their website and believe what they say. You'd actually want to do some investigation to see what these people are like and what they really believe. But it would also mean studying economics in order to judge the candidates' proposals. And this is actually more important, I think. Most of what candidates talk about has to do with economics. They also talk about social issues, which may not have a direct economic impact. But in any campaign, there's a lot of it is devoted to should we raise the minimum wage? What should we do about Social Security? All these things of an economic nature. How is somebody supposed to judge the candidates' promises or analyses of things if you don't understand economics? I mean, you need to understand economics, and yet people don't think they're obliged to be. If they're going to be a good citizen, nobody feels, I better go out and read some good economics, Frederick Bastiat or take a class. Most people think that they can judge economic proposals without having any expertise whatsoever in economics, and that's supposed to be the good citizen. The good citizen, exercising a civil responsibility, is supposed to be able to vote intelligent while being totally ignorant of economics. That sounds like a crazy system to me. I don't get that. Am I the only one who thinks that's crazy? I don't think so. I think this group here may agree with me on that. Now, people aren't going to study economics for the most part, unless they happen to love it already, because they're too busy. They're busy making a living, caring for their families, being involved in social organizations, community organizations, religious organizations. Most people are not going to bother to start reading economics so that they can judge candidates' proposals. But anything less is ignorant voting, is even irresponsible voting. So the informed voter is a chimera. It's a phantom. It can't exist. Aside from just a few, a small minority who happens to love this stuff. I mean, okay, I'm a masochist. I love this stuff. So I'm reading it as a hobby as well as a living. And that may be true of some of you people here. We're all nuts. But the average person who doesn't have a direct interest in this stuff is not going to take the time. How many do you think they're going to pick up on the federal budget to take a look at it? I did some research a couple of years ago when sequestration was the great looming threat, and I kept reading all kinds of contradictory things about whether is it really going to cut anything, is it just cut off the growth, and it was you could read all views. I finally, with the help of the budget guy at the Cato Institute, found the right spreadsheets at the federal, the Office of Management and Budget, or the Congressional Budget Office, websites and went through the numbers to see, what was the real story from sequestration. It took me a better part of 2 days. Tell me what average person, and this is not an insult to the person. That person has better things to do, believe me. Who's going to take the time to do that? Very few people. And yet we expect people to vote intelligently. I don't see how there's a disconnect there. So since people can't vote on the basis of serious knowledge and issues, they vote on more superficial bases, such as how the candidates make them feel about themselves, or how well candidates conform to long-held, unexamined biases. And this particular aspect is explored in a really good book I can recommend to you, Brian Kaplan's book, The Myth of the Rational Voter, Why Democracies Choose Bad Policies. I really recommend that book. There's a newer book out now that I think goes over similar ground. I heard an interview with him, but I haven't read it yet, by Ilya Soman, I think published through the Cato Institute, and I don't have the title offhand, but it's very similar, about how the idea of an informed voter is an impossibility for the kinds of reasons I've been talking about. And therefore, when if I say this to a progressive type, he'll leap to the conclusion that therefore I'm an elitist. I think an elite group of people should be making the decisions because I'm saying regular people can't make them. But that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is issues should not be left to voting. Issues should be left to voluntary association in the marketplace, because I want to make a distinction between the way people choose in the political realm and the way people choose in their private realm, in the market realm. All the things I said about the choices in the political realm, the lack of responsibility, the externalities, the lack of incentive to become knowledgeable, none of those things apply to our individual actions in the marketplace or in private society at large. Because in those situations, take the marketplace, if I'm in the store looking for products, I'm aware of two things. Number one, when I buy the product, I get the product I choose. In other words, my choice is decisive. If I'm in the grocery store and I see Wheaties and Cheerios, and I make a choice for Cheerios, I don't have to wait to see what the voting returns are and hope that Cheerios wins, 50% plus one, or else I had stuck with Wheaties. No, I get the one I pick. My choice is decisive, the opposite of voting. Two, I pay the price. I pay the cost for the product. I can't push the cost on other people. And then when I get the product home, I will get the benefits or the lack of benefits from the product. If I eat it and enjoy it, the enjoyment's mine. If I don't like it, I learn and I buy something else the next time. None of those things occur in the so-called political marketplace, and I don't even like to call it that because I don't think it has anything in common with the marketplace. Okay, so in this light, the sacralizing of the vote looks like a cruel joke on people and a costly distraction if we value liberty and justice. And this reminds me of a great essay written by Benjamin Constant, the French, actually Swiss-born classical liberal, spent his time in France, and he spells his name like Constant, C-O-N-S-T-A-N-T. You might want to look up his essay, which I'm going to talk about, called The Liberty of Ancients Compared with That of Moderns. This is a famous essay, 1816. You can find it online. The title is The Liberty of Ancients Compared with That of Moderns. And what he's doing in there, but as the title says, he's contrasting the way the ancients, for example, in Greece, thought of liberty versus how the moderns, he means after the liberal revolutions, thought of the idea of liberty. And he points out that the ancients' idea was liberty consisted entirely of the freedom, the right of a citizen to participate in the political process. In other words, everything was left. Don't forget, these were small nation states, small city states, direct democracies. They weren't voting on candidates. They were voting on policies. So freedom to them meant you got to participate in the debate and you got to cast your vote. But then you had to go along with what the decision was. And nevertheless, that was freedom. Constant says the aim of the ancients was the sharing of social power among the citizens, of the same fatherland. This is what they called liberty. But at that point, then, you were obligated to go along with what you and the rest of the group decided through this process. And it led to, as he says, the complete subjection of the individual to the authority of the community. Nevertheless, in their view, you were still free. Contrast this now with the modern view. Again, he means the liberal view, the view that we are trying to revive. That their liberty meant not participation in the political process, although for Constant that was a small part of it. But the major part of liberty was the private life aspect of it, the ability to govern your own life day to day, on your own, without anyone's permission. Practice the religion you want or no religion. Find the kind of work you want to do. Acquire property, use the property, and as Constant even says, abuse the property. This is the modern notion of liberty. These could not be more different. Now, Rousseau, if you remember your political theory, political history, Rousseau was a modern who was writing with the ancient mindset, because Rousseau had the idea of the general will, right? We all get together, we participate in the political process, we vote, and out of that, the general will is revealed and expressed. And then we all have the obligation to live according to the general will. That was freedom. And if someone didn't want to, he could be forced to, because according to Rousseau, we were only forcing that person to be free, because freedom consisted of living in accord with the general will. Well, very much the ancient view, even though Rousseau chronologically was modern. So the progressives at NBC and other places are really ancients in their mentality, not modern at all, because they seem to have this view that if we all can just participate freely and then collectively make decisions, that is freedom. And that's what Chris Hayes seemed to be saying when he says the only way that counts, the only way of expressing yourself that counts is casting that vote. I could go on. I'll go on for a few more minutes and then open it up to the conversation. But there are a couple of other things I wanted to point out about this. What they're going to say here. One answer to this point about the ignorant voter, and Kaplan deals with this in his book, is that, and this comes from serious political science types, they've tried to answer this point. They say, look, if let's say 80% of the population doesn't know much about anything. I mean, those people don't know, who the senator is, who the congressman is, how many years are served, what the three branches of government are. The public opinion polls show pretty thorough ignorance about stuff like this. Now, we may, as libertarians, think, well, these people are smart. Why are they wasting time on that stuff? They're putting their attention on what matters, so it's not so bad. And that may well be true, but it is a fact. So let's say you have 80% of people who don't know much, and so therefore just cast kind of a blind vote about whoever makes them feel good. The 20%, the assumption is the 20% are well educated and do know the right way to vote, and so the 80% will cancel themselves out. Like 40% will be on one side of make one error, 40% will make the contrasting error. They'll cancel each other out. The 20% that knows what it's doing will then cast the deciding vote, and we'll get good policies. That's one way this is. Political scientists have tried to salvage this, but Kaplan makes a very important point about this. That only works. That answer only works if the error is random, and if roughly the error is split on each side, let's say pro-market and anti-market, to make this simpler, although most of the time we don't have candidates taking pro-market and anti-market positions, but let's assume for assumption that there's a candidate who's generally pro-market and a candidate who's generally anti-market. It's not the case that the 80% is going to break 40 and 40 for the pro and the anti, leaving the 20% to make the difference. Because, as Kaplan shows, and he's relying here on lots of, many years of public opinion surveys, the error is not random, but is rather systematic. In other words, most of the error is on the anti-market side. It's not 40-40. It may be, 70-10 anti-market. And why is that? Because people generally have biases, anti-market biases, and he discusses these biases at length. An anti-market bias. So the idea is if somebody is profiting, someone else must be losing. So there's that kind of bias in the back of people's minds. There's an anti-foreign bias. So they don't like free trade. They don't like to trade, have foreigners having access to our markets. I think there's something not quite right about that, not Americans. And then what goes along with that is what Brian calls a make-work bias, the idea that anything that reduces a job is bad, is a bad thing. Free trade can eliminate certain jobs because a particular good might be made abroad. And people only see the losses. They don't see the new jobs that come up. So you put these three things together, anti-market, anti-foreign, and make-work biases, and people generally hold those biases, and the people with the least education hold them the most. As you go up the education ladder, they fade, but people still hold them just to a lesser extent. If you have those three biases, then the error is not going to split pro-market and anti-market. It's going to mostly be on the side of anti-market, and that means even if there were educated pro-market voters, they wouldn't be enough to offset all the anti-market error. So voting, there's no way to get out of this problem, that the voters are going to be generally uneducated, and there's not going to be anything to offset it. I think I'll stop there. I'm sure there'll be plenty of things that people want to add to this and talk about. So let me unmute the mics. Okay, I think we'll be able to hear everybody now. And so we can talk for about a half an hour. Who wants to begin?
I'm going to be on a panel next week concerning voting rights.
Good.
And what you had to say, because you kind of addressed the question I was going to ask, when you're voting in the marketplace, an individual does have more significance, as you said, because it's directly affecting the person doing the voting.
Right.
Whereas voting in the voting booth, like you mentioned, so why does everybody get all jazzed about voting? Anybody have any opinions on that or comments? Because I've always wondered that.
Somebody want to take a stab at that?
Well, among other things, the first place they ever hear about the duty of a good citizen to vote is in the schools, which are run by the government.
Gosh, that must be a coincidence. I'm sure that's a coincidence. No, that's a good point. They obviously have an interest in encouraging civic participation. And maybe they themselves don't realize how toothless it is, but it's part of the, there's like a reigning ideology, which is like the national religion, right? And voting every, couple of years is like going to church. It's the civic church. So you're supposed to do it. In some places, in some countries, it's compulsory. I think Ralph Nader for a long time has wanted to make voting compulsory. I think you get fined.
Well, you constantly hear this comment too. I'm sure all of you've heard this. Hey, why are you bellyaching? You didn't vote in the last election. What are you bellyaching? If you don't
Sure.
vote, why are you bellyaching? What right do you have to bellyache? I'm thinking.
Well, there's a great answer to that.
The way it's sold, imagine the system we have now without elections. You can't. It doesn't. It makes even less sense than it makes now, to an extreme, to an absurdity. And so pushing voting is really kind of like the curtain, It's like, don't look behind the curtain, You get a vote,
Right.
It seems like the most tremendous thin argument you can put together.
Voting is the
I think it's almost the opposite. I think you could take voting away entirely and still have the system we have now.
Oh, that's what I mean. But I'm talking about the way it's presented, not the way it functions.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
It creates a veneer of power and control.
Right. Because how many times do people say, well, I'm a voter or I'm a taxpayer, which is the flip side, of course.
Voting is the opiate of the masses.
Yeah.
Right. But then how would our elected officials get elected, I guess? Or don't we have?
Well,
or wouldn't there
the
be
same
a-
way
It would reduce it to an absurdity.
hang on. I
They
think
get elected.
I didn't want to. I don't want this to end up being a debate between anarchism and minarchism. That wasn't the purpose. Let me say one thing about this complaint. Howard, I think, raised this point about you can't complain if you didn't vote. This was discussed in 1850, believe it or not. I think it was 1850 in Herbert Spencer's book Social Statics. You might want to look it up. He takes up this point. He says people will say if you voted for the winner, you can't complain because your guy got in. And if you voted for the loser, you can't complain because you went in to the booth, you went into the process knowing you might lose. And then they say if you didn't vote at all, you can't complain. So he says, how nicely this is rigged. Nobody can complain. that ought to make us very suspicious. This was Spencer a long time ago. See, he was he was a bright guy, Herbert Spencer. So yeah, you said how do we pick officials? Yeah, like I said, let's not turn it into an anarchist minarchist.
No, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean it that way. I was just trying to.
Sure.
I don't know.
No,
But outside of that,
I think what it leads to, without getting into that bigger debate, is as little as possible should be left to the democratic process, because the democratic process is such a flawed way to pick things or express preferences.
isn't that one of the major ideas of the Constitution? To take things away from the political process.
Yes.
Well, that's a whole other discussion. I actually have a slightly different view of the Constitution. I think that's how we're taught, but I'm not so sure that was the purpose. But that's a different.
Well, to a degree, I think you're right, John, because the Constitution is, restrain. It's supposed to restrain the government to an extremely limited amount of activity.
Well, that's what the federal.
So in that regard, it does take away a lot of things from the political process, or it's supposed to anyway.
Well, that's what the Federalists wanted you to think. I'm not so sure that's what they had in mind.
Well, possibly not.
It's an ownership issue. You vote, it's supposed to make you seem like you're included when you really, of course, I think even the minarchists can agree at this point we're not.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Well, it's the analogy is you're a member of a, I don't know, when I was a kid, my family was a member of a swim club. And so it wasn't a private club that we were patrons of. We were actually owners, and I guess maybe they had a vote on the committee, that governed the thing. But of course, there you bought into it and you decided to buy into it. It was for a limited purpose. There it actually works, and even there you might decide it's not working that well, and you could quit it. But you could quit it too without moving out of the country.
Right. Well, that's kind of a form of what they call voluntary government, I think, where you opt in. Right.
Yeah, but of course, in this case, of course, you're not allowed to opt out. Everybody assumes if you're here, you've consented, but as my friend Charles Johnson likes to point out, if there's no way not to consent, then it cannot logically be said that you consented. And think about it, there is no way not to consent. Right. You can't just say, look, I'm not going to vote, I'm not going to ask for any of your benefits, that's my non-consent. They won't leave you alone. They'll still say you need to pay taxes and all the other stuff. So if there's no way not to consent, then there's no way to consent. In other words, no one has consented to the system that we now have. Even if they think they did, they really didn't, because to consent, there has to be a way not to consent. Now, someone will say, yeah, but you didn't move out of the country. You didn't move out of the country. But that begs the question. That already assumes the government has the authority to own the country. So it's putting the rabbit in the hat. You can't pull that move. It's an illegitimate move.
Does anybody feel like when they go into the voting booth, they're sort of signing the social contract?
I haven't voted since 1980, so I don't remember.
When I first stopped voting, I stopped voting because I didn't want to have given someone the go-ahead to act on my behalf as a person. So I stopped voting for people first because, I didn't really know what they were going to do, so I couldn't vote for them. And then the reality set in. It's like, well, crap, it's not doing anything anyway. It's more of a functional issue for me. It's like, oh, gee, well, yeah. But then again, you do get to say, well, I did not participate in this. But I think that's really the least compelling argument for me is that voting is immoral. I don't really make a direct connection, although I think there's some implication in what I said that it kind of borders that.
Yeah, there was a school of libertarians, I think they often call themselves voluntarists, who used to argue that. Carl Watner and Wendy McElroy argued, they put out some literature, you can probably find it online, that it was actually immoral. I'm not so sure. I don't think I buy that. I don't think it's immoral. I agree with Spooner that you could, maybe you can vote defensively to minimize the harm to yourself. And you are going to suffer consequences whether or not you vote. So you may, again, there is still the one vote problem, but a person may.
Of course, voting again is a poor defense, or none at all, really.
Yeah. Oh yeah, right. Because of the one vote problem, it is a poor defense.
I guess you could take the argument that the atheists argue about religion, and that is that not only is it a poor defense, but it actually does harm by making you think you're doing something.
Yeah.
Takes that energy away from you, saps you. You could be spending that time, I don't know, coming up with some way to put away your money better, or any other use of your time.
Yeah, that's what I meant when I said that the Chris Hayes piece, the spot, would instill a passivity in people. Because all you need to do is go every 2, 4, 6 years and pull those levers or mark the ballot, and you've done something. Now I can go back to not worrying about the political system anymore.
Right.
That seems to be what that means. I wish it was that easy, because I worry about the political system every day, and it'd be nice to have a break from it. So, someone else, speak up. What else you want to say about that?
Well, somebody mentioned the morality of voting, and I don't also agree that it's not immoral simply to vote as voting, because I mean I don't vote much anymore, but I've gone in to vote when I live in a small town, and when we have a tax increase on the ballot, I don't have a problem with going in and voting no. Mm-hmm. Although I'm not comfortable voting for most people, simply because I think it is immoral for voting for someone to be a proxy for me who I know who will do something that I would disagree with.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good distinction. Yeah, I can't see the problem with voting against a tax increase or voting.
And
for
in a small town,
cut.
there's a small chance that your vote might actually change something.
A small chance, yes.
Yeah. The smaller it is, the bigger the chance. True.
It's tempting.
Well, it gets closer to the individual marketplace idea that you were talking about, Sheldon, where an individual votes with his dollars, and that's about as true democracy as you can get. True democratic, where the person actually doing the voting is either going to gain or lose as a result of the vote, and you're going to get immediate feedback on that, as opposed to going into a polling booth and,
right.
Okay, your guy won, whoop-de-doo, or guy lost, whoop-de-doo. I mean,
if you go to the etymology, I agree. That's probably as democratic as you can get.
Yeah, and Mises used to talk about the marketplace as the truest democracy. The only reason I don't like to do that so much is that in a democracy, it really pretty much is winner take all, and in the marketplace, it's not winner take all.
no.
I mean, it's everybody what's the old proverb? Take what you want and pay for it. The old Scottish proverb. Superior system. Isn't it funny, though, that the people that love the whole process of voting are usually the same people that put down the marketplace? I find that very curious, that they opt for the one where your own action is not decisive.
Yeah.
Over the system where you get what you want, and then you also, since you experience the consequences, you learn, and then you adjust the next time. You adapt to your own experience. People don't seem to learn from their voting mistakes. I don't know if they even perceive them as mistakes.
There seem to be people wired to appreciate a collective will over an individual will, and vice versa, for some reason.
Yeah, I think they see something. I mean, if you listen to Chris Matthews talk about it, you'll think there's something mystical, and everybody going and traipsing on the same day to the polls, and and engaging in this ritual. It's like it's a religious thing.
Well, isn't that in part because we're all Marxists, or we've all been taught Marxism, we just don't call it that? I mean, we've got the social safety nets, and we've got the government taking care of you, and all this stuff. It's a social welfare state. It's all over the place.
Well, of course, ultimately under Marx's ultimate system, there wouldn't be any voting. So, not sure I'd want to call it Marxist, because he Democratic. He didn't like the Democratic Socialists much. He thought they were compromisers and gradualists.
That, and I'd say a tremendous number of progressives would be very vociferous that they don't want to interfere with the means of production. They're all about being proactive to make sure that the outcomes of individuals who fail are high. They seem to be able to make a distinction between Marxism and production and all that stuff and people falling through the cracks. And I think it's unfortunate to lump them together, because I know some of them, and frankly today they're coming toward liberty because they see the damage of that, of using the government for that.
Yeah. Yes, Coco. Another implication of this is, again, I watch too much MSNBC, I'll confess, but I get writing ideas by watching it. Another implication of this is, given their view toward voting, this sort of mystical attitude, to them the worst thing you can do to a person is to interfere with their right to vote. And you know how they complain about the various laws that are passed for ID and all that stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't have a strong position on that, but notice how they think that's the worst thing you can do to somebody. Now, as long as there's voting, as long as we live in this system, yeah, I don't think people should be stopped from voting, and I don't think they should throw up laws making it harder. But I can think of many more worse things you can do to somebody, like taking his income, or taking his land on an eminent domain, or censoring him, or sending him off to war, or spying on him. I mean, I can come up with a long list of things that I'll still rank ahead of throwing a few obstacles in the way of voting.
How about licensing his Second Amendment right to self-defense? Now, they're afraid that you might not get a vote, something that's practically meaningless, yet they're willing to pretty much prevent a huge block of people from owning handguns or whatever.
Or speaking of licensing, occupational licensing. I can think of 100 of things that I think are worse than throwing some obstacles in the way of someone's voting. Even if I think that's bad, I still think there are a lot of things that are worse. But they don't. They act like the worst thing you can do to somebody. I mean, punching them in the stomach is not as bad as making a person show an ID card at the polls. Now, whether you like that or not, I still think there are more serious things you can do to someone than having them produce an ID card. Anyway,
So, like,
where does it say we have a right to vote? Anyway.
I don't know, is there something in the Constitution about that?
I mean,
isn't it like 14th or 15th Amendment?
no, but that even came past the original Constitution, and that was later.
That comes pretty late.
Sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely. There. But, well, wait a minute. What's this 3/5 of a vote thing? There seems to be something at least implied.
No, that was
right.
for,
So there has to be a full vote.
No, that was for apportionment for taxes and
that was
congressional
in the House of Representatives.
Yeah, House of Representatives. I guess it was just implied. Look, a lot of things were implied in the Constitution that weren't said outright. For example, the Fifth Amendment says that property can't be taken for public use without just compensation. But don't forget, that's the Fifth Amendment, right? That was adopted after the Constitution. Right. They didn't originally intend that those 10 amendments were going to be adopted. But that means they presumed eminent domain, and yet it's not mentioned in the Constitution proper. So there are some background assumptions for what, and this was, supposed to be a constitutional republic. So I guess
it finally got spelled out in the 14th Amendment, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, there it said you couldn't deprive people of that right without due process, and the states couldn't deprive it because it was a reaction, of course, to the Civil War and slavery and all that. I guess even the part of the Constitution that talks about how the president gets elected, it talks about the Electoral College, but it leaves to the states how the electors get picked. I don't think that's spelled out, right? They could pick those some other way, and I think it used to be done in different ways.
Well, and actually, where the hell the candidates even come from in the first place doesn't seem to be spelled out, which is a big problem, I think, if you believe that democracy works at all.
Yeah, but you wouldn't expect that to be spelled out in the Constitution where they come from.
I mean, well, where do the candidates come from? There should be some baseline. If it were to make sense, there would be some baseline for where the candidates come from, but it didn't even talk about it. So you can imagine this local government completely rigging the system and there being no constitutional defense. as though the Constitution meant anything.
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a spoonerite, I guess.
Well, me too.
That's okay. That's all right.
So, anybody else want to bring up any points? Go ahead, Travis.
I got a. Well, I want to take this. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, awesome. I want to take this deeper. I'm an individualist anarchist, and I'm wondering, kind of like the process in which how to achieve anarchism as soon as possible. It's interesting. Rothbard believed that in order to achieve anarchism, we have to go through the political process. Whereas Samuel Edward Coken III believed that we have to use counter-economics, basically using black market economics to undermine the government-regulated economy. And this is a huge disagreement that Coken and Rothbard got in. Rothbard looked at it, it's like, look, pretend we're on a plantation and we're slaves, and we've been given the chance to choose our slave owners. Wouldn't we then want to choose like the most friendliest, the nicest slave owner that we could possibly choose? And so he looks at basically democracy is just like we get to choose who we want our master to be, and we should choose the nicest master. And if you know like the history of Rothbard, he helped start the Libertarian Party, and he helped start Cato Institute and all these other organizations to really try to push libertarianism into the political spectrum. Whereas Coken said, look, that's great, but okay, instead of us choosing our master, wouldn't we as slaves then want to try the underground, wouldn't we want to try to find the Underground Railroad as soon as possible instead of trying to choose our masters? And so that was his response, is that we should be working every second toward undermining the system and trying to find a way out instead of actually trying to go through the layers of, you know, the political system, bureaucracy, and all this. So, Sheldon, I would love to get your thoughts, and you guys here too, what you guys' thoughts on that and how we could achieve free society someday.
That's an interesting perspective, Travis. That's very interesting. I may use that next Wednesday on my panel.
I like this full diversity of efforts myself. I think they work best when you allow creativity of the entire market to work on the problem in its own different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of believe in that. To let 1,000 flowers bloom. I don't normally quote Mao, but that one's worth quoting. Actually, I worked with Rothbard in the Libertarian Party and outside the Libertarian Party. So let me say a little bit about that. I think actually he didn't help set up the party. I think he came to it reluctantly after a few years. And I think what convinced him, and then later I don't believe he was much involved in it toward the end of his life, but I think what convinced him was it was the time, and he might have decided this was not true after all, but that election time was the only time of year that most Americans were thinking anything about political ideas. And so therefore, by having candidates in races, you could have a libertarian talking libertarianism at a time when people were more likely to hear it. So I don't think that his view was that it was elections that were going to change the country, but rather it was elections that were going to provide a forum that libertarians could talk to people when the rest of the year they weren't paying attention. That's how I recall it. Now, you know, maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's how I recall his attitude.
That was probably before the perpetual election cycle, though, too, right?
It was before
Now
cable.
it's always
It was before cable
election
TV. That's true. That's for sure.
No, you're absolutely correct. But he also didn't, from what I've read of Rothbard, he also didn't think that the black market would be sufficient enough or be big enough to actually overcome the government monopoly market.
Yeah, that may well be true. I don't specifically remember anything what he said about that, but I can see him maybe saying, you know, most people will be reluctant to go into the black market. They'll associate it with something unsavory, illegal, and most people won't have the taste for it, and therefore it'll be limited in how much you can grow. I could kind of see him saying that. So yeah, he was not a counter-economics guy. I think that's right, but I think he thought change would come from a cadre of well-informed libertarians, you know, spreading the word to the rest of the country, with the elections being one way, one conduit for getting the word out there. Right. We do need a discussion of a strategy, because I don't think that a lot of progress has been made in getting people to understand our view. I mean, one example I keep going back to is, ever since the end of World War II and the Foundation for Economic Education started, libertarians and free market people have been preaching that minimum wages are bad. right? That they cost people jobs. Yet it keeps, but they just go up. We haven't yet had a debate whether we have it. Debate's only over whether it should go up or not. And so after all these years, after 65 years or more, it seems like we're back to square one on the minimum wage. In fact, you can even find economists today who will defend raising the minimum wage. That was harder to do a few years ago. So that looks like a backslide. I mean, what is 50, 60 some years of propagandizing about free markets and the minimum wage in particular have to show for it? If today you could go out with a clipboard onto a busy city street and stop everybody and say, would you sign this petition to put a rise in the minimum wage on the ballot, you'll get your signatures, I guarantee it.
Yeah.
No trouble whatsoever. Now, a lot of that's just people thinking, yeah, I'll feel good if I sign it. I don't know what the minimum wage does. They don't care. I'll just feel good, and this person will think well of me if I say, sure, those low-income people should have a higher wage. I'll sign. But you'll get the signatures, and when it comes time to vote, you'll get the votes. That happened in 2006.
And you know that subject matter at least has some statistics, data that could back up why the minimum wage does in fact eliminate jobs. Whereas the voting thing, how do you describe to somebody what kind of a world we live in without voting? How do you do that?
Yeah, I agree. It's not.
Well, you tell them that they get a bigger vote in everything they do with their money. They get the exact result they paid for, and if they don't, that's a matter of customer service, and you have to work that out. But you don't get denied after you voted with your money.
That's right.
You get what you paid for.
No, the reason they can't picture it is because they think everything that we see today would be the same, except they didn't get the vote. But they're not extending. They're not realizing what changes would happen. They think everything will still go on just like it is, except we don't get any say, even that little say. So we got to
the seen versus the unseen again.
We got to explain what the change would really involve.
Yeah.
I think the biggest myth about, or the biggest irony of the minimum wage is that it's like, oh, we're here to help the poor and stuff, when it does the exact opposite, and also it protects corporate power. I mean, Walmart is for raising the minimum wage. Why would they do that? It's like because they care about workers? No, it's like they want to put their competition out of business. So,
well, and Sheldon pointed out that the economists already know this. Even the statist economists know the minimum wage isn't a good thing, but there seems to be this automatic, and it's that fatal conceit of democracy, I think, the idea that people can vote themselves wealth they don't actually have if you put all the pieces together to do so. Mm-hmm. And of course it all comes tumbling down at some point, and I still firmly believe and still fervently hope I'm wrong. We're coming to that point economically here now.
Getting very close. I agree with you.
But that means we also need a plan for what it's going to look, what we want it to look like after it comes tumbling down.
Yeah, and that's where agorism can help, because we have systems in place, hopefully, that we didn't have 20, 50 years ago, and we're putting ourselves in a position to be better custodians and better helpers along toward what gets left behind. It's probably a slim hope. Usually when they manage to crumble society, something worse comes up afterward. But
well, we have some disadvantage in that we don't have a plan. Right? We talk about we're in favor of the spontaneous order. We're in favor of spontaneous order. We don't know what
we have 1,000 points of light. Remember, we have individual plans.
But we can't spell those out. We don't know what those are, so we can't tell people.
Well, we don't have.
Here's what a thing's
that's how the market
like.
Works. It doesn't spell everything out.
I know that. But when we're trying to convince people, they want to spell it out.
Obviously the persuasion. I was getting at it's a good thing we have agorism because it fills in a void. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we have the tough job of teaching people there's such thing as undesigned order. That's not a very intuitive idea. Most people, what do you mean there's undesigned order? If it's not designed, how can it be order? That's what we're fighting. Mm-hmm. And yet people observe it every day. They just don't know they're seeing it.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, they do it every day themselves.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of the way I like to describe the market to the uninitiated. It's like what you already do, except when government interferes.
Yeah.
If you're not a criminal, you're already doing it.
Well, that's the kind of thing we need to get across to people. I agree absolutely. You have to relate it to something they do experience in their own life, or else it's too abstract, and they won't latch onto it.
Yeah, very well put, Sheldon.
Well, I see we're up at the top of the hour, so
Yeah.
thanks for everybody. We'll do this again.
Thank you.
We'll do this again next month. It's always the Wednesday, the first Wednesday that has double digits in the number, so whatever that comes out to be. And I forgot the topic, but I'll let you know. You'll see it on the FFF website. I appreciate everybody.
Whoever can work out a script for our calendars to figure that out, that'd be great.
All right.
Yeah, we need a government plan for this.
Okay. Well, thanks everybody. See you next month.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sheldon and everybody.
Good night.
Good night.